Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Youth Research Showcase. I am your chair, Ifa Abassa, and I'm extremely excited to be hosting and facilitating today's research from our four amazing panelists. But before we get started, I'd like to see if I can do some justice to setting the stage of the research that's to come and to ease you into this lovely showcase that we have for you. So I'm passionate about education and youth empowerment. And today we're all here, we're gathered to gain some insight into four recent pieces of studies that have prioritized and have listened to young people's views. And across all four pieces of research, I was preparing for this, I noticed that there were four evident themes that suggested that young people are in need of more support now more than ever. And so allow me to share the four themes that I've gleaned whilst preparing for this showcase, and hopefully the panelists will go into further detail with their bits of research. So the first theme that I gleaned, having prepared for this showcase, is that youth unemployment is at an all-time high. As a young person myself, I understand how important it is that employers start investing in the youth audience and investing in skills. And unfortunately, we're starting to see a bit of an increase in youth unemployment. The second theme that I've noticed while preparing for this showcase was that young people's self-belief is at an all-time low. A lot of young people especially feel they're limited or they're not having the opportunities to prepare for a career or to even dream of certain aspects of their life that they'd like to. And so that's something that I've noticed while preparing for this and across the research, that young people's self-belief is really low. Number three is that time and time again, and I've said this on some of my platforms, there's been a stall in careers work experience, in a careers education, and in skills development. Thus meaning that young people are feeling inadequately prepared for the future, inadequately prepared for work, and feeling that they don't have the practical skills for job hunting. Being on a work placement myself, I understand the importance of having a practical experience with employers, and I understand the insight that it gives you into the workplace. And I believe there needs to be a renewed focus on developing young people's skills and their careers. And then the final theme that I notice is that across the UK, young people are being overlooked when it comes to education policy changes. The very people making laws and making policy changes about young people are not including enough of them in the decision-making process. We say young people are the future. We say they're the future that we're looking towards, and yet we're just not investing enough into them. And so I believe that if we are going to move forward, and you will see from the different pieces of research, we need to have young people sitting at these decision-making tables to be able to have feedback and to have input into these decisions that concern themselves. So I hope I've set the stage for the panelists and their research that ultimately suggests that we need to address the needs of young people now. And so I'm going to call up our first panelist, Kat Ems, who will be joining us from EDGE and presenting the research joint dialogue. I hope it will give you some food for thought and some things to think about as she presents her research. Over to you now, Kat.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Effie, for the welcome. I'm just sharing my screen now. Is that visible?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, thank you for having me on today. I'm going to be talking about some research that we published at EDGE last week, and it's all around young people's development of employability skills at school. And this research was doing this from the perspectives of learners as well. So just to kind of set the scene about where this piece of research came from, I just wanted to introduce phase one of the research that we carried out a few years ago now. We published in 2018, and we did this piece of phase one of the research with education employers and the National Education Union. And this was to really kind of understand what the employability skills and competencies are that employers are looking for. So we did a literature review and we did focus groups with employers to understand what they are looking for from their potential employees. And we came up with these 8 skills and 4 competencies that were really the ones that were continually coming out in those discussions. And following this, we did a survey of secondary school teachers in England to kind of understand from their point of view, are the young people developing these skills and competencies in school? And if they are, where are they developing these? So is that in classwork? Is that in assessment, in extracurricular activities, and so on? So you can read this report that's on the Edge website. I'll just briefly pull out a few of the main points that came out of that. Majority of teachers actually thought that these skills were being developed in school and across a variety of settings, but particularly they highlighted classroom work and extracurricular activities being quite important for the development of these skills. And particularly classwork was praised for developing communication skills, problem solving, teamwork, creativity and reflection as well. The second part of the survey, we wanted to understand the changes that the Key Stage 3 and 4 curriculum made in 2014, what impact that had on the teaching and the development of these skills for young people. And unfortunately, a lot of teachers were claiming that actually it had been detrimental effects on the development of these skills during school. And particularly you can see from these 2 bottom points, particularly at GCSE and A-level, that has been more impactful, and almost half of teachers believe that there was fewer opportunities to develop these skills at that GCSE and A-level. And then there's some skills in particular, things like creativity, that were even more affected. As you can see here, 66% of teachers felt there was less opportunity for that development at GCSE and A-level, and 56% at Key Stage 3 as well. So moving on to this next phase, the results that we published last week, we wanted to now look from the perspective of learners themselves, those young people who are at school, and really understand what they believe employability means to them, what skills they think are important for their future careers in life, and to understand where they think they're developing these skills during the school day, or if at all, and kind of give examples of the kind of activities that they're doing to develop these. So we started a couple of years ago or so, and we began with focus groups in schools and sixth form colleges. We focused on those in year 10 to 13, so approximately ages 14 to 18, across who are following an academic route, so generally A-levels, GCSEs. And then COVID happened, so we had to put a stop to some of the focus groups. We tried to find other ways to continue those, but obviously it was quite difficult. So later in the year, we developed a survey to go out to young people. So the results that I'm going to share and that are in the report are a mix from the focus groups and the survey as well. And we use thematic analysis to look at these. Also, just to say, we did do some focus groups in some SEND schools and kind of look at their activities more widely. And that forms a separate section in the research report, which you can read, but I won't go into detail about that today. So to begin with, we wanted to understand what young people thought employability skills were and their kind of understanding of employability. We kind of found that they were unable to give kind of a general definition of employability skills so much. They had some understanding of a number of terms and were able to name examples of particular skills. And they identified some of those that we hadn't actually come up with in the first phase of the research. They mentioned often things like adaptability, leadership, people skills, originality, and so on. But generally, there was kind of a lack of shared understanding of language between different skills and employability in general. So this is from the survey that we did, and we asked learners what the top 3 skills they thought were going to be the most important for them to develop. And as you can see here, communication skills was overall seen as the most important for them to develop, with 58% thinking it's one of the most important, along with confidence as well being quite high up there. And during the interviews, students explain the importance of some of these skills, things like confidence and communication were important skills if they were going to an interview. And they mentioned interviews as needing a lot of these skills. Creativity, people were saying they shouldn't just be like a machine, and that employers want a unique person. So also some awareness there about kind of the threats of AI and kind of automation in jobs as well, and originality and creativity can help make you stand out from other candidates as well. And then you can see here at the bottom, right down, with only 5% digital skills. And that's quite an interesting one. I'm going to go into a bit more detail in that in a couple of slides, so I'll leave that one for now. We also asked both in the survey and the focus groups where young people believe these skills are being developed, in what kind of area of the school day or outside of school. And yeah, it's a big table here with lots of numbers, but I've highlighted a few ones that are quite interesting here. Classwork was believed to develop things like problem solving, a lot of teamwork, numeracy, and the young people in the interviews gave examples of particularly subjects like maths, geography and science, developing things like problem solving and numeracy. Other examples young people gave in the focus groups were around things like music and learning an instrument, supporting the development of creativity. Drama clubs helped develop communication skills, and team sports were useful in kind of resilience and team working again. When we asked young people to kind of drill down a little bit more into that and give specific examples, so they really found it difficult to kind of articulate particular examples of where they developed skills, rather than just saying, oh, maths, problem solving as well. Interaction with peers was quite mentioned quite a lot in terms of communication skills and team working skills as well. And then also, again, back to the digital skills, almost a quarter saying that these were not being developed in school as well. And so confidence, 20% saying that they weren't developing these in school. So just to focus a bit on digital skills, as we saw, 5% people thought that was an important skill for them to develop, which is quite low. In the interviews, they give recognition to that digital skills were important for them in the job market, and that they need knowledge of computers, for example, to get on in employment. So it could be something around kind of the questioning, the fact that they believe themselves to be digital natives potentially already, and that they don't need to develop these skills further, that they think they have sufficient skills in this. But then there could be a bit of a tension there between what they believe their digital skills are like and those that employers are asking for, because as we've seen from a lot of the employer research, they're really needing a lot better digital skills from their employees. And then many of the respondents saying that the digital skills were not being developed in school as well. And then I pulled out a couple of quotes here about things like IT rooms were not actually being used that much for using the computers, and that young people were doing written work instead. And then another year 12 student here saying that they grew up with technology from a young age, and so they're already able to use computers. So just to summarise finally, most frequently noted skills that learners felt they were developing in school were communication skills, numeracy and problem solving. And they really believe that communication skills was one of the most necessary skills for them to develop further. Several skills that they thought they were not being developed as much in schools were, as we said, digital skills, being informed about careers and education pathways, training pathways, and then drive, creativity and reflection as well. Interaction with peers and also extracurricular activities were mentioned quite often in developing things like communication skills and team working. However, in terms of the extracurricular activities, it was quite interesting in the particularly in the focus groups. A lot of the young people saying that they were finding less and less time to take part in these, and particularly at the post-16, with post-16 groups, they were saying they started off doing activities, but then had to stop because of the pressures of the curriculum. And then finally, yeah, as I said before, learners were generally confident in using some of the terms and language around skills development, although often there wasn't kind of a shared understanding always, but actually being able to articulate real examples of where they've developed skills, which potentially they could use in interviews or when they're going for a job, wasn't as good. So yeah, a bit of an issue around that. And that's it. Thank you for listening. You can read our report, which is on the website, or it's got more detail in.
Thank you, Kat, for kickstarting this showcase with your research. I think all of us listening probably found the 5% of young people thinking that digital skills is the least important skill to develop very interesting. And like you said, I think it's that, you know, they were born into an age where they use digital skills a lot, but a lot of them wouldn't necessarily mirror the two or marry the two with it being useful in the workplace. So that was very interesting. And I think it was also interesting that your research pulled that there was a lack of shared language and understanding around the terms of employability and transferable skills. So a lot to think about from your research, Kat. And my question to you is, what is one thing that stands out from your research that should be prioritized for the future development of young people?
Yeah, I think, like I just mentioned, the extracurricular activities were highlighted as so important in developing a lot of skills that perhaps young people weren't developing in the classroom. So creativity and team working, which they didn't seem to have time for during kind of normal lessons. So I think that they're really, really valuable to support young people in their development of skills and competencies. So I think really allowing more time for young people to do these activities, and also the resource as well. Just kind of comparing some results from the first phase of the research when we asked teachers about the development of these skills. We found that independent school teachers highlighted that they were doing a lot more of these extracurricular activities, and these were really helpful in developing these skills. So I think there's also a question there about kind of the resources that mainstream schools need to support young people to do these activities, and also the fact that, like I said, that at post-16 particularly, but also to an extent at GCSE, young people are just not finding the time because of the pressures of examinations and assessment and the classroom activity. So they were giving up these activities as soon as they were going to sixth form, which is a shame.
Thank you so much, Kat. A lot of food for thought again. And it's interesting that you picked up on resources as well. I think all of us can agree that with more funding, we'd have wider access to resources for these students in school. So thank you so much, Kat, for sharing your research and for answering my question. And I think this is a lovely segue into our next panelist, Josh Knight from Youth Unemployment UK, that will be presenting the research Youth Voice Census. very excited to hear a bit about the research and for Josh to share his information for us all, and then we will move over to our next panelist. Over to you, Josh.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us today to share our Youth Voice Census. I'll share my screen. Can we see the slide? Are we happy?
Yes.
Perfect. So hi, I'm Josh, the Senior Policy and Research Lead at Youth Employment UK. And today I'll be presenting our Youth Voice Census. And this is our annual youth survey, which is a really important moment each year to hear young people's experiences of education, employment, and their journey to work. A real opportunity for them to share with us their big concerns about the year and how they think things are going for them. So this year, or say last year, sorry, it's 2022, we were sponsored by some amazing partners. So thank you to the Edge Foundation for your support on this, but also Amazing Apprenticeships, Pearson, and Skills Training UK. And the census received over 4,000 responses, which is a huge number, which enables us to give a weighted view of how young people aged 11 to 13 are feeling about where they live, where they study, where they work, and how they can access support services around them. And it's important to note that our survey was open from the 31st of March to the 31st of May last year. And so with that in mind, it's a snapshot, and we're kind of preparing for our next Youth Voice Census in 2023 too. But here are the big figures. Here are the big kind of headlines for us. That young people told us that they are in a mental health emergency. We heard that young people feel that being young in itself is a disadvantage, but actually, if there's any sort of difference, if you're a young person with a protected characteristic, if you're a carer or a care leaver, then you feel that difference being a further disadvantage to you. We also heard that young people are feeling unprepared for the world of work. They're not ready to make those transitions at post 16 or even to leave university and find employment. And actually, young people don't believe that they can access good quality work where they live. So we found really that young people are struggling under pressure of the cost of living crisis, of mental health concerns, of rising anxiety, and they don't feel that the systems around them and the support services around them are doing enough to help them make those positive next steps. So I want to talk today through each of the key findings, highlight some of the things that were shared with us by these young people, and share that story that we heard last year. So we found that for young people, they are in crisis right now. They're feeling that their lives are out of control and they've got really significant fears about their futures. And it's important to note that we do expect some levels of anxiety for young people, particularly at key transition points. This year was different. And we heard more frequently than ever before in the free text commentary, young people linking back to their concerns and their fears about anxiety and mental health. Now, in the context of the additional stresses of COVID-19, of the rising cost of living, of some really uncertain political and economic landscapes, both here and also further abroad, it's felt that young people found each small step and each small decision really debilitating for them. We also heard that young people felt that loss of social connection during the lockdown really acutely, and actually lots of young people were concerned about friendships around loneliness and how they can connect once more with other people. And this is all impacting how they feel about their futures. And we're finding that for young people, anxiety is or will be the biggest barrier for them accessing work. We found that 51% of those in education or looking for work cited anxiety as their biggest barrier to finding employment. And that for those who were in work, over half of them felt that anxiety was their biggest barrier when they were searching for work too. We also know that self-belief is at an all-time low. When young people were asked to rate their confidence scores in a list of skills, actually confidence was the lowest, alongside self-belief. And only a third of young people are confident that they have that self-belief to make those positive next steps. And for all of these young people, at every age and stage, we found that young people were worried about making friends and they were feeling lonely too. In addition to this, we found that young people with any sort of difference felt that that difference was a disadvantage. And so particularly for COVID, those young people with protected characteristics, carers and care leavers were more profoundly impacted by the uncertainty and the challenges of COVID. And at every stage of their journey to work, they felt that COVID-19 was going to impact them more negatively than their peers. We also found that young people with protected characteristics, carers and care leavers, were less likely to feel safe in their local areas. They were less likely to feel safe at school, particularly those young people with additional educational needs. We found that young people felt less access to local amenities around them, parks and libraries and other resources. They didn't feel that they were for them. They also were less likely, to have places to study or to work from home, particularly during those lockdowns when working from home was the norm. And they are less likely to be confident that they would be able to find good quality work where they lived too. And overall, we heard that young people are really feeling unprepared for the future. Part of that is down to work experience. We know that COVID-19 for lots of young people put a stop to that opportunity to go and find work experience. And so 45% felt that their biggest barrier to accessing employment was actually their lack of work experience. Over half of young people looking for work also felt this way. And obviously this is a real concern, a real struggle. So we're really hoping that in our next census, there'll be more opportunities for young people to access that work experience, because only 36% of young people in the 2022 Youth Voice Census were able to access any form of work experience, whether that be in person or virtually online. And this all impacts how prepared young people are feeling about applying for work or finding opportunities, and their confidence at applying for work at every stage of that application progress is down on previous years. As you can see the figures there, only 44% feel that they're able to write a good CV. Less than 40% are prepared for those assessment centres. Just under half feel prepared and confident to go into an interview. And only 41.5% are really feeling prepared to start employment at all. So there's some real work that needs to be done in boosting young people's confidence about making those positive steps into employment. And when it comes to finding work, actually, young people are telling us that they don't really believe that they will find good quality work where they live. Only 28.7% of young people felt that employers were really supportive of hiring young people. So their perceptions about how employers will treat them, the opportunities they will get, were really low and really poor. And only 14.2% of respondents believed they could access good quality work where they lived. And so we asked young people what they wanted from employers. And actually, they're all the things that I think many of us want from our employers too. They want to be paid fairly, but they want that opportunity to develop their skills. They want training opportunities. These were seen as the most important aspects that an employer should offer a young person. And the things that really stop young people from applying for jobs and the things that concern young people was low pay, but also being met with entry-level roles which had a mismatch in the terms of qualification criteria and work experience that they needed to actually apply for those roles. So lots of young people are put off because of job adverts and not having the confidence that they will be able to meet those requirements. And for those in work, just over half felt that they were paid fairly for the work that they do. And only 60% really believe that they have the right training to do their job well. So there's lots of work here for employers to continue to do to support young people once they are in employment. So that is a really brief summary of a sort of 200-page report with a full and detailed overview of how young people are feeling at every stage as they progress into work. And you can use a snazzy QR code there to access it. And at this point, I would like to sort of talk about the 2023 Youth Voice Census, which will be launching on the 31st of March. It will be open for 2 months until get the right date, the 5th of July. And it's open for all 11 to 30-year-olds, again, to share their experiences of where they work, where they live, and their journey to work too. and that is our Youth Voice Census.
Thank you so much, Josh, for an enlightening piece of research that touched on 4 key areas that I think we can all attest to that young people are facing difficulty and challenges in. And I just want to sort of reiterate some of the statistics that you shared on the screen. I think the one that jumped out on me that when I was doing a bit of research into the report was 51% of young people aged 19 plus thought mental health challenges were the biggest barrier to accessing work. That's a lot of young people that feel they're facing barriers to entering work. Another that I read was 31.2% of young people in work struggle with their well-being. And so it raises a question, Josh, how can we better support our young people mentally and also with their well-being?
That's a really good question and a really difficult one to answer, I think. In addition to our Youth Voice Census, we've also recently held an inquiry exploring the impact of mental health on young people getting into work through our role as the Secretariat to the APPG for Youth Employment. And we heard kind of evidence from some really large national research organisations, but also grassroots organisations who offer service delivery at the frontline level. And the message and the findings were the same, that young people are facing unprecedented levels of kind of experiencing mental ill health and poor well-being. And so if we want to sort of tackle that and address that, it really needs to come from a top level. In 2020 to 2021, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services had over 750,000 referrals to their services. And at the same time, 38% of those were not seen. The case was closed before that young person was able to access that service. So we're seeing a huge mismatch in terms of the demand for mental health services and the ability to meet that demand. So in that report, we call for the government to set out a really ambitious long-term mental health plan. We know they had a consultation last year about mental health and well-being, where they received evidence, and as part of their consultation, we really encourage that to be sped up so that young people feel that they can access services when they need them. And I think that's the really important point, is that young people don't feel that the systems work for them right now. And when they're at school, they're not feeling like they can reach out to people to give them that support to make those positive next steps. And as you mentioned around young people in work, there's also a role here for employers too, to ensure that young people feel that they can access a line manager, that line managers are properly trained, that they are aware of some of the mental health issues that young people might be experiencing, and so therefore they can access that support through their employer too. So it's quite a big, broad ask, but also it's about reassuring young people that we are there for them, that we can listen to their voices and to their experiences, and that they can access that help when they need it.
Thank you, Josh. I think the three things I've taken is then that we need the government, the educators, and the employers and schools to all work together to really address all the needs of young people. I guess it's not just one group alone. We really need everyone to come together, collaborate together to really sit down and help with the young people. So thank you, Josh, for an enlightening piece of research from the Youth Census. And I'm going to call upon Faiza Khan now from City and Guilds to present her research on youth misspent. And I'd like to encourage everyone listening, if you have any questions at all, please drop them in the Q&A function below. And once we open up the Q&A, we will get to your questions. Over to you, Faiza.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much to Edge for the invitation to share research from City and Guilds, but also to do that with others, because I think one of the values I've been gaining from bringing the research together on one platform from a number of organisations is that parity piece, Ife, that you pointed out at the beginning of the webinar. I'm just going to ask a check. Can you see me and can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. So I'm going to start by taking you through some research that we did not long ago with around 5,000 young people. We polled 18 to 25-year-olds across the UK to ask about their experiences of work. I'm going to take you through some of the findings, not all of them. It is a very deep report and you're welcome to find it on our website. And then start to think about actually what are those parity pieces that we're hearing, because I think whilst the challenges are stark, what is heartening is young people are telling us what they want. They are telling us the solutions. And so with a shrinking economy, with 1.3 million vacancies, can we afford not to listen? So let's go into the presentation with that question in mind. So as I said, we had around 5,000 young people that we polled, just to give you an idea of the context in which we're operating. That comes at a time after a decade of austerity. Those of you that have been in the youth sector of old, and I spent many years in that sector, will remember targeted youth support services being cut over 10 years ago. We'll remember high levels of not in education, employment and training. And actually those statistics and those services remain with us, compounded by also what we've been hearing in the education system from Edge about how young people leave school, the levels of, not just the levels of qualifications, and you can see on my slide there that we point to that, but actually how ready young people are for work, how able and confident they are to access opportunities, and what that means in terms of their trajectory for secure or insecure work, with 45% of young people finding themselves in insecure work. So I think when we look at these issues, we have to look at a systemic long-term view, look in the rear view mirror, think about how we got here, and then really think about how do we move on together. And so what did the research tell us about who these young people are? Perhaps you won't be surprised to know that with the decade of austerity, a pandemic, and disadvantage being particularly high in certain areas of our community still, that those young people who are finding themselves losing out from the labour market, or not realising their potential, or indeed not believing they can realise their potential, are in groups that have experienced adversity. So again, my point here is that it's not education alone, it's not advice services alone, it's not employers alone, but actually it's how we're supporting our young people from the early years through education, through to their experience of work as they're making transitions to adulthood. At every point, we can turn the curve for young people experiencing disadvantage. And so actually just a few statistics in our report, staggering levels of disadvantage correlating with the lack of aspiration, I guess, and lack of opportunity for young carers in particular, those that have been in the care system themselves, young men that have been in prison, young people in receipt of free school meals, and those with physical and health issues, and indeed those that perhaps have found that they're not able in the education system to achieve. But what's interesting is there's so much hope for those that are finding other ways to achieve, and we'll come to that later. But before I get to that, again, setting that context of, as an individual, if you think of young people you will know how a lack of confidence can hold them back. You will understand how, as they're making those transitions, growing up, working out who they are, that lack of belief, the feeling of not being good enough, is such a stark driver for achievement and impact as they grow up and they access opportunities. So we know that from the research, 16% of young people are economically inactive. A third, around 26% or a third, say that they thought government was doing enough, but that means that a significant proportion don't feel government is doing enough. Similarly for employers, 33% feeling that maybe employers are doing enough, but ask yourself, what do the other 2/3 think? And it goes on, and really there's a theme about actually the right skills and feeling equipped to do well. And as we all, me included, I've worked for many years, when I do well at my job, I feel a growth in confidence. And so imagine feeling a regular kind of hit from the system, or your adversity as you're growing up, or lack of opportunity. All of that is compounding. To our young people, a significant number of them leaving school and entering the workplace, or making decisions about their future career without that confidence where we might want it to be. And so again, following that theme of confidence, 64% saying it's not easy for young people to get a job these days. Only 70% in a job that they actually want to be doing. So enjoyment as well. So it's not just confidence. Do you enjoy what you do every day? Do you thrive from it, and therefore want to do better at it and want to engage more? And then 29% saying they've struggled to get an interview, to even get their foot in the door. And why wouldn't that surprise us when we're looking at that continuum of adversity, confidence, lack of opportunity to gain skills? Actually, it doesn't surprise me that 29% have said they would struggle then to get an interview. And actually 9%, 1 in 10, saying that they will never be able to start working. So huge, at City and Guilds, we say, believe you can. That's our kind of one of our strap lines that we say, believe you can achieve, believe you can fulfill your potential. And I think we all looked at this report and the findings and felt deeply that there was so much work to do around this belief agenda for young people. And again, it pronounces itself in disadvantaged young people in particular, for people not maybe punching as high as they can, going for lower paid jobs, and young women in particular, perhaps not believing that they're going to be supported in the workplace as they make changes in their career. And we found a mismatch between perhaps some of the jobs that young people want to do and could enjoy more, such as the arts or entertainment, and the jobs that are available. And yet, actually, the arts and recreation and creativity is one of the growth industries for this country. And so there's something for me about how we're opening up accessibility, opportunity, and also helping our young people find pathways to industry if they're not benefiting from social networks or other things or corporate relationships that they might not own in the way that others would. So I think there's something about that systemic approach again in industry here, and thinking about really going out and reaching young people who want to work for you. And again, you can see a mismatch in the report between some of the opportunities that are available and some of the things that perhaps young people want to do. I think I've said enough about disadvantage and gender, but there are some kind of further lots of data in this report for you to look at. And in terms of salary expectations, how different groups view their ability to earn, and where they will see themselves in the future, again translates into the groups that we're seeing, perhaps not feeling that they can really meet their full potential. That's translating again in their salary expectations. So our recommendations, in a way, are, as you said, if it is a systemic wide approach. We didn't focus on one particular agency in government or employers or educators. We talked about everybody coming together and pulling together around actually social policy issues that have been with us for some time. So young people for many years have said they find the struggle of someone to talk to a difficult thing as they're growing up. And I look at the EDGE research and it's coming through there. And I look at the Youth Employment UK Youth Voice Census and it's coming through there. You talk to youth workers, they will tell you that. And you talk to educators who would love to make that time more for well-being, but perhaps it's not something that they can do in and amongst the other things they're doing at school. So is the interrelated approach to thinking about young people as a whole person that is accessing lots of different services, and how all of us have a duty to make that positive. Because at every point you're not making it positive, we're compounding that lack of confidence, that lack of self-belief. So it's incredibly important as people are going through emotional and social development as they grow up and get older and gain and work out who they are, that they're helped to feel they can, to believe they can. And so I think that's the end of the slides. And you certainly had a question for me, which we can come to in a moment. But I hope that if I've done nothing else, I've demonstrated the golden thread between all the other research, because again and again, we are saying the same thing. And actually, that fills me with some hope that young people are telling us what they want. We've got to listen.
Thank you, Faiza. A round of applause there. Thank you so much for another enlightening piece of research. And I love what you said as well about the golden thread. I started this showcase and introduced that there is a thread amongst all the pieces of research that we're starting to see this trend. And young people, not only are they facing challenges, but they are speaking up. They are telling us, we want change and we want this now. And I really want to hone in on the recommendations. I think it's fantastic that your research has proposed recommendations for each prong of the education system. And I want to hone in on the government recommendation that you have. You mentioned that you want them to work with educators and employers to optimize on existing skills interventions and to utilize funding pots. I think Kat mentioned this at the start, that to have more resources, we're going to need more funding. And so my question to you, Faiza, is how do you then envision the report's recommendation for the government being delivered practically?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. And it's a big question. As I said earlier, systemic-wide approaches, we are all in it together. So I want to start with that. And if you look at the themes, again, if we unpack the golden threads we've been hearing, you're looking at themes of confidence, of creativity, of a lack of motivation or opportunity to feel motivated. And those things are interrelated together with the funding. So fair and accessible funding, following through to the individual and their aspirations. Now that requires a national strategy for skills, something we've called for at City and Guilds through the Future Skills Coalition. It's a new coalition that started a few months ago, and it's asking everyone who cares about skills for the future to come on board with us and to really call for 3 policy solutions to skills. And those are, as I said, a national strategy for inclusive growth, a commitment to lifelong learning. And through that, if you think about that age range, lifelong learning from the early years right the way up to as you're making a transition to adulthood, but actually as those young people become young adults and experience other opportunities right the way through to the later stages of life. And we're seeing people in the over 50s range having concerns around their training and redevelopment. So for us, we've got that long-term view of lifelong learning and how you can put skills in at every point to address some of these issues that many of us feel, regardless of what age we are. And then fair and accessible funding. And I want to point here, because of the audience we've got and the particular facet we're looking at here in terms of young people, you might have seen our Levying Up report, which was released in National Apprenticeship Week recently. We're not talking about that research here today, but I am going to make an opportunity to point people to it, because it talked about, well, if you want to level up, you have to levy up. You have to look for ways in to skill people up. Now, if we're looking at some of the data we've seen, we're looking at a number of young people saying that, you know what, actually, I'm leaving school without the right skills. I'm leaving schools without being able to access opportunities. And you're looking at 1.3 million vacancies that are unfilled. You're looking at a 2023 economy that the Office of Budget Responsibility tells us will shrink. Again, the question of can we afford not to listen? But we do have policy solutions. The apprenticeship levy, in terms of unspent funds since 2019, is at something like £3.5 billion. So when we talk about fair and accessible funding, we are not talking about magicking up pots of money. We are talking about using pots of money that are available for skills in a better way. So maybe rethinking the level 2 reduction for apprenticeships so people have an access to opportunity and careers that otherwise they wouldn't have. Thinking about modular courses, thinking about levy for the apprenticeships being used in a way that can help to create bite-sized learning opportunities, off-the-job training. These are all things that are in our gift to address. And I go back to that national strategy for skills, because if you're asking me about government, that's what we need, a cross-party commitment to skills and skills for growth. And through that, coupled with the education system and employers, I think we could have a really bright future for our country and for our young people.
Well, we've heard it from Faiza. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for answering my loaded question, and to Kat and Josh as well, because I know my questions have been very big and loaded, but you've answered them very well. Thank you. And over to our last panelist, Sharon. Last but certainly not least, from King's College, Sharon Gurwitz, who will be presenting the research, Young Lives, Young Futures. Over to you, Sharon.
Hi, can I first check that everyone can hear me and you can see the slides?
We can hear you, slides not so much.
We can't see the slides. Oh. Okay, am I sharing the wrong thing? Let me try again.
Yep, we can see that now.
Sorry about that. Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be here. I'm going to share in the next 10 minutes some key findings from a report that we've published today called Schools for All. And the subtitle of the report is Young People's Experiences of Alienation in the English Secondary School System. Sadly, the findings depressingly resonate with the themes of the other research we've heard today, although there are some positive aspects, findings as well that I'll sort of come to at the end of the research. So it's not all doom and gloom. But first of all, just to say a little bit about the research upon which this is based. So the data we're drawing on here is from a 5-year ESRC funded study, which is being conducted by a team of researchers from King's College London and the Edge Foundation. And this research is looking at young people's experiences of their post-16 transitions, so from whether they're age 15 or 16 to 20, with a particular focus on those who don't go to university. And today we're going to be talking about the results from the first wave of quantitative and qualitative data collection. So this relates specifically to young people's experiences. And just in terms of the policy background to this, vocational education and training is currently at the centre of government's plans to address youth unemployment and skill shortage. And there's a very strong discourse of wanting to create greater parity of esteem between vocational and academic post-16 pathways. But simultaneously, since 2015-16, we've seen the introduction of school curriculum and accountability reforms at Key Stage 4, which work in the opposite direction of giving greater parity of esteem between vocational and academic post-16 pathways by reinforcing the very heavy emphasis on traditional academic subjects and knowledge in the school curriculum. And in some earlier research that some of the research team did in 2016 that was funded by the then National Union of Teachers, now the NEU, teachers expressed real concerns about the impact that these Key Stage 4 reforms are having on young people, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds and with special educational needs and disabilities. And in a way, the research we're reporting on here is a follow-up to those findings that's focusing on young people's perspectives, because it's striking, as other people have said already, that young people's voices are virtually absent. Well, they're completely absent in policy decisions and in debates. And so the people who are most affected by reforms, at the moment, they're not really being listened to. And our research, the survey aspect of it, have been carried out with a cohort of young people who are 15 to 16 in the summer of 2021, and whose entire secondary school career was in schools whose curriculum was shaped by the Key Stage 4 reforms. And this group was also affected by the last 2 years of their compulsory schooling coinciding with the height of COVID-19. So just to tell you a little bit about the methods we used, and then I'll move on to some of the key findings. So we're drawing on 2 data sources here. First of all, a survey that was carried out in summer 2021 with a large sample drawn from the National Pupil Database, and we had 10,438 responses. And this is sampling, a nationally representative sample of the whole of that cohort. So not just young people who don't want to go to university, but all young people. And then alongside that, we've conducted interviews with 113 young people aged 15 to 18 with a diverse range of backgrounds and interests, but all of whom have said that they aren't intending to go to university. And you can see from the chart that they were in a range of settings, ranging from mainstream schools to alternative education, sixth forms, further education colleges, a university technical college, some in training and some not in education, employment or training. So I'll first just give you some key highlights from the survey. A key finding was, so we asked young people to say how much they agreed or disagreed with various statements around attitudes to school. And one of the statements was, on the whole, I like school. Now, 55% of young people agreed with that statement, which is a majority of young people, but that does mean that a substantial minority, 45% of young people, are not agreeing that on the whole they like school. And what's interesting when you compare that to similar research that was carried out in 2006 by the Next Steps longitudinal study, where 84% had said that on the whole they like being at school. The results aren't completely comparable for reasons I don't have time to go into now, but still there's enough of a difference there to know that something has happened in these last 15 years that are making young people enjoy school less. And when you delve deeper into different student characteristics, those from low-income backgrounds, so those who have been eligible for free school meals at some time in their lives, only 47% of them agreed that on the whole they like school. Those with special educational needs and disabilities, only 45% of them agreed. Those who identified as non-binary and those who identified as trans were much less likely to say that they enjoyed school. And finally, those who said that they were not at all likely to go to university, only 1 in 3 of those people agreed that on the whole they liked being at school. Second set of findings from the survey, we asked students whether they agreed with the statement, "I am noticed and listened to by my teachers." 64% of respondents agreed that they were, but the percentages are lower for young people with special needs, with low predicted GCSE grades, young people identifying as trans and non-binary. We also asked young people who they received encouragement from in their lives, and they could tick as many categories of people as they wanted, but less than 1 in 2 said that they received encouragement from their teachers. And it's really important to flag up here, and with this whole report, this isn't a question of blaming teachers or shortcomings of individual teachers. What we're interested in is the conditions that mean that students aren't feeling encouraged by their teachers and that teachers aren't able to give the encouragement that students need. Again, those numbers are lower, those percentages are lower for young people identifying with moving on to this is a different question around unfair treatment or bullying by peers. So we asked young people whether they felt unfairly treated or bullied by peers for a range of characteristics, and 45% of those identifying with minority sexuality categories and 39% identifying as trans reported unfair treatment or bullying by peers based on their sexual orientation and trans status respectively. And almost 1 in every 4 young people said they've been treated unfairly by peers because of their size or style. So moving on now to our qualitative interviews, which give a feel for some of the kinds of things underlying these feelings of alienation from school. We know from other research and also from what other people have said today how year 11 is a particularly stressful time for young people because of exams and also because of the pressure to make decisions about their future in quite a compressed time period. And this is particularly the case for young people who aren't taking the traditional A-level to university route, who are faced with having to make decisions about their futures in a hurry and at a stressful time. And young people, a lot of young people, again, echoing the findings of the other reports we've heard about today, talked about how these pressures and expectations took a toll on their mental health. So, for instance, John says, I think the pressure around young people really does have an effect on their mental health and the standards they have to be at. I think there needs to be less pressure on people my age to do well and more support. And then Dylan said, there's so much pressure put on us, especially this year. It's just overwhelming, so overwhelming. I don't even know where to start, don't know what to do. And there's such a big window of what to do next year. And it's just overwhelming, all the options. A second theme coming out of the interviews was these feelings of misrecognition that came out strongly in the survey as well. So a strong feeling of young people feeling unsupported and not seen by teachers at school. And sometimes this was linked to identity characteristics and most notably social class and age, with young people talking about how they felt they had nothing in common with their teachers. So Damien said, I've had so many teachers, they have said to me, I know what's going on. You just don't have a clue. I've grown up in some of the roughest states. They haven't seen that. They haven't experienced what I've experienced. And Ricky as well, you can see feel just alienated in terms of his relationships with teachers. A related theme is around lack of support. So especially young people who have been bullied or have had ongoing struggles with their mental health, or who are dyslexic, felt particularly unsupported. And for many of these young people, this led to them moving schools, sometimes multiply, or leaving school entirely. And these two quotes are both from young people with dyslexia. So Chelsea says, academically, I didn't enjoy school, but I had a lot of problems with anxiety. And unfortunately, the school didn't really support me that well. So I struggled in that sense. And I missed a lot of lessons because I just couldn't really go in. It was horrible. And Ewan said, when I went to school, they didn't know what to do with me. So they just let me go on my phone during lessons. The teachers wouldn't really talk to me either. Now, some of them talked about having really positive relationships with teachers, and select one or two teachers. And really just want to emphasize again here, this isn't about blaming teachers. Teachers, and we know from our previous research, feel as much victims in all of this as young people because of the strong structural pressures on teachers, which means that they don't have the time and space to attend to the pastoral needs of their students and build relationships as much as they would like to. Of course, there is excellent practice going on in places, but systemically, there are challenges for teachers in terms of just finding the space to really build relationships with their students. And another theme arising from school is this whole issue about the curriculum being narrowed and so much emphasis being placed on academic subjects and knowledge, and that emphasis being misaligned with a student body that represents such a wide range of interests, aptitudes and aspirations. So young people who don't conform to sort of traditional models of what it means to be a good student, which is a narrow academic model, felt out of place in schools. So Salim, for example, talked about the only lessons they liked being graphics, and ended up not going to school because they'd go there and, or they didn't like school because they'd go there and their whole brain would just shut down. Martin said, I never really tried in school because I didn't understand what was going on half the time. And Maxine talked about feeling like a robot. Just finally, to finish on that more positive note that I mentioned at the start, many of the people we interviewed were currently students in vocational education and training, in FE college or alternative provision. And most of those young people are finding learning enjoyable and achievable in these different settings, and they were thriving in a way that they hadn't at school. And a big theme there was around respect and recognition and relationships with teachers. So Lydia said, it's like a big step when you go from school to college. You have much more freedom and they treat you more like adults, not children. And Damien said, schools need to bring in people that understand. That's why I like these teachers, because they've been there, they've done that, they've got the t-shirt, they know how to help. And Phil said they actually help you. It's 100 times better. They actually speak to you. They make you feel more welcome. And this is my final slide. The other aspect of these alternative settings that students really appreciated was the flexibility and choice they had there. So Gazira said, I was in high school, so I was doing a lot of subjects and I didn't like most of them. I prefer college because in college, I'm not doing many subjects and you can make a choice. And Brooke said, I think we learn more. When you're in school, you write it all off a whiteboard and just listen to the teacher. But in college, someone's showing you and they go, oh, why don't you try it? So you're learning in a better way. So what these findings are suggesting to us is that there's something about the mainstream school environment, rather than learning and education in themselves, that can be off-putting and unengaging for many young people. And there is work to be done in sharing insights and practice across sectors so that schools can look at what's happening in these alternative settings that are making young people feel that they can thrive more than they could at school. And finally, my cocktails and the details of the project website.
Sharon, wow, lots I'm thinking about. So I'm sure everybody else listening to us on the webinar has a lot of food for thought. And I've seen a few questions in the chat. Some people would like to get in touch with you directly, Sharon. So maybe at the end, if you could just share your email address again, that'd be perfect. I'd like to invite the panelists back on now to, put their cameras on so we can move into a quick Q&A. We've had a few questions come in, and I'm very excited to delve into these questions and ask our panelists to answer some of these questions. So I'll get the ground running straight away because I know we've had a few. So a great question came in from Emily Tanner. Confidence was a prominent theme across Kat and Josh's presentations. How well do we understand confidence issues for young people? What do young people say would help? So I'd like to go to Josh first, and then maybe after that, Kat, would you like to answer? So take it away, Josh, to answer this question for me.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, really interesting. Sharon's research there really pointed to some of those drivers of sort of poor mental health and well-being for young people, particularly from what we got from both the Youth Voice census, but also from speaking to young people. So we go out to sort of supplement the big data set and held 6 focus group sessions across the country. And what lots of young people told us was that this lack of confidence really stemmed from quite early in school, pressures around exams, making some really quite big decisions quite early on in their lives. They felt that the options that they're choosing at sort of 16 or 15 to go into, whether it be A-levels or to college or other vocational qualifications, felt overwhelming, and they didn't feel prepared to make those choices. And so part of that is about a lack of really clear and good quality careers, education and guidance, really clearly setting out some of those pathways. That means when we get to those points, young people are not feeling like they've got the tools to make the best decision for them. And then also feeling that once they've made that decision, that's it. Like they can't change their course, they can't change their mind. They're set for life based on what they've had to decide at 15 or 16. And that's one part of the picture that we're seeing, particularly when we ask directly about employability and kind of thinking about pathways.
Thank you, Josh. Kat?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with Josh. And I think things like the pressure of examinations is really damaging for young people's confidence. Some of the things that young people mentioned in the focus groups as helping to develop their confidence was things around kind of presenting and being able to speak in front of an audience or more broadly just in the classroom and through those kind of activities. So where that was happening, that was seen as beneficial. And I think from other work that particularly we've done at Edge, seeing schools that are delivering their curriculum through things like project-based learning has really helped develop young people's confidence. So kind of taking that focus away that everything in the classroom is about kind of passing the exam and looking at kind of developing broader skills through working on a project, engaging with employers and kind of feeding back their projects to employers at the end has been really beneficial in not just developing confidence, but developing communication skills and also developing confidence with employers. And then that's also helping with their confidence in understanding kind of the jobs market and what careers might be available for them too. So I think there are things that can be done to help with that in the classroom.
Thank you, Kat and Josh, for answering that question. Very apt points there. Another question that's come through, several of the presentations also mentioned the impact of recent education reforms and for there to be a greater focus on exams. To what extent have recent changes added to the pressure on young people? That's another question that's come through. So I'd like to go to you, Sharon, first to answer this question. To what extent have recent changes added to the pressure on young people?
So I'm assuming the question is about recent changes to the curriculum, so in the last sort of 5 to 7 years. It's added to pressure because there's so much pressure on schools. Schools are measured by a very narrow measure, which is Progress 8. And that's the measure of how much progress students in their school make, which is in their best 8 subjects, which have to include traditional academic subjects. And this has sort of resulted in a much more narrow curriculum, so that there's less opportunity to do creative subjects. And also the practical elements of more practical subjects have been reduced. So everything for young people is much more how they're performing in a written exam, which is such a narrow way to test people, but also such a narrow way to educate them, because the whole of their education system is in their last years of compulsory schooling is preparing them for exams, and that's incredibly stressful and pressurizing for young people. And although there's many complicated reasons why we have a mental health crisis, that clearly is contributing to it. It's not everything, but it's contributing it. And those quotes I gave from young people talking about how pressured they feel, that there were lots and lots of quotes like that. Those weren't cherry picked. Young people just feeling so pressured by having to do well in exams. And that's because teachers are being pressured to get their students through the exams, and they're being rewarded in terms of their pay in many schools, if students do well in exams. So the pressure is on the whole system, and it just really needs to stop.
Thank you, Sharon. I wondered, Kat, if you would like to add anything to this, to answer this question, or if anyone else on the panel would like to say a few words.
I don't think I can add too much more to Sharon's response there. It's, very encompassing about, particularly the pressures around examinations. And although our research in this latest piece, we can't really see what the difference has been, because we're just capturing young people's views from the last few years, so they won't know the difference to the Key Stage 3 or core curriculum. When we compare it to the teachers' results from a few years ago, they were saying that it's been very detrimental in terms of the time that they've been able to spend on developing these other skills. And as I mentioned earlier, things like creativity and learning about the careers and world of work has taken more of an impact, and their time available to teach those things.
Thank you, Kat. Josh, I know you have your hand raised.
So I'll just disclose I'm a former teacher. I was a teacher for 9 years before moving into the policy world, and I can completely attest to what we've just heard from Sharon, but also from Kat, about the amount of time that teachers feel that they can have to spend with their young people to develop them as individuals, well-rounded individuals, opportunities for creativity, for collaboration, that project-based learning. Starting initial teacher training, there was a much broader focus on an individual and having that young person leave a school with kind of those well-rounded skills. And I did feel that kind of the move to kind of a more academic curriculum in general limited the options that young people had, and kind of forced them to focus on those academic subjects. But also for teachers, as Sharon mentioned, that real kind of narrow measure of a school's success, or a teacher's success, or a department's success being all about results, means that the freedoms that teachers might want to have to develop a young person are kind of taken away, and you're forced to just teach to the letter and teach to the exam, which is not why many teachers got into the profession. But that's kind of how it plays out in the classroom lots of the time.
Thank you, Josh, for that. Wow, lots to think about, honestly. Really, really key points that we've mentioned in this discussion. And so there are clearly things that we need to do to change things, government, schools, individuals, employers. And so Faiz, I'm going to come to you first with this question that we've had. What are key things we might want to ask employers to change?
So I think if we take an equity lens to this and we take a business development lens to it, both of those things can come together really in a practical way for businesses and employers. We are saying employers will want to think about their future growth, their future workforce being future-proof. So all of that is about business development and thinking about talent. And I go back to the opportunities again through some of the apprenticeship system, where you can really, we're seeing, I think it's something like about 55% of the levy was spent by employers, and I mentioned 3.5 billion since 2019 had been unspent and returned to the Treasury, actually. So there's something in, and I'm not going to lay all of that on employers, because I think there's something about how the system can be more flexible to allow people to access those resources. I think employers can really think about the findings we heard around welcoming younger workers into the workplace, thinking about the adaptations they can make, early talent routes. You know, we have examples here where in City and Guilds, some of our younger entrants might have a work daddy or a work mummy. You know, these are creative ways that you can really think about what somebody comes in with, and you have to adapt. But it relies on I think, a leadership approach, across department approach in organizations to really think about early talent, but then a policy and a lever approach. What levers can you pull on as employers and businesses to get that training in, to get the funding working for you? And so I suppose, going back to my first response to that question on an equity lens, going back to who you're working with, thinking about what they walk in the door with and the adaptations you need to make for them to be set up for success, together with thinking business and development opportunities, the future of your workforce. Are you really getting the talent in you need? Where could that come from? And I suppose a third aspect to that is being really broad-minded about where talent can come from. And just want to give a name check to Breakthrough, who are one of the charities that we fund through the City and Guilds Foundation. And they have been doing a 10-week placement with a private sector employer, where they've been skilling people up who are at risk of entering the criminal justice system or have come out of it with digital skills. And it has been a really intensive 10-week program working with those learners. Now, what is happening there is an equity lens on what are those learners coming with and what do they need, a bespoke training approach, and then skills at the end of it, which are then going to set them up for being an asset for a business. So I give that as an example of those things can be done. And, you know, I just go back to the comment from Josh, that actually one of the things I find in the more intensive programs that we see in place with people coming from disadvantages, that time and that commitment to developing them. So it's not, I'm not going to pretend it's easy. It requires, you know, really kind of a depth of commitment across the organisation, and quite savvy pulling on those levers as well. Remember, they're there for you.
Thank you, Faiza. Brilliant answer. And you touched on equity, and one of the questions that has come through, actually, that I think, Kat, you might want to start with answering, sort of incorporates like equity into the question. And it's, what are the key things, how much should we rely on these extracurricular activities, and how does this reinforce equity issues?
Yeah, I think what we've seen, and it's quite obvious that a lot of, for example, independent schools have a lot more opportunity to and resources to deliver these extracurricular activities, and also young people from more privileged backgrounds are having far more opportunities to pay for and take part in these activities. So there needs to be a lot more support for those from disadvantaged backgrounds to take part in these. And also another thing I mentioned earlier is that, you know, there's a lot of pressure within the curriculum, and particularly as young people go on to A-levels and higher up through the education system, there's more and more pressure, and they have to drop these other activities that are seen as very beneficial. So kind of just the support from teachers and parents to ensure that they continue or can continue to take part in these. And this isn't, simply just supporting them, but also there needs to be additional resources for these young people to take part in these as well.
Thank you, Kat. And widening on that theme of equity then, this is another theme that sort of runs throughout all the presentations. Sharon, what are some of the priorities we need to address in this area?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I got distracted by reading the chat. I can't multitask.
No worries at all. So we're widening on that theme of equity. It's a theme that has run throughout all the presentations. What are some of the priorities we need to address in this area of equity?
Yeah, I think I would say one of the really striking things from our survey is how many young people feel that they're treated unfairly and bullied in school by their peers. And so I think there's something around schools having space and resources to focus on whole school practices and policies that enable schools to be safe and equitable spaces for young people, so that people feel that they can look and dress how they like, that they're not going to be bullied or victimized on the basis of their race, ethnicity, sexuality, etc. All of these things are problems in wider society, but if the teachers and schools had space and resources to really sort of think about how to be more inclusive and welcoming environments. And I know a lot of schools do, but it is just one of those things that, as Joshua talked about, teachers' freedom of manoeuvre has been really kind of restricted. And so I would say that would be a key priority, resourcing welcoming environments.
Resourcing welcoming environments, noted that down. And to sort of end this Q&A, we've had amazing panelists. I'd like to throw this question out to each and every one of our panelists. I'll start with Josh and then call upon our panelists to answer this. Faiza mentioned in the research for Youth Misspent that she stressed the importance of national strategy for skills. And so from the recent research, what is one thing you would like to include? What is one ask you would like to include in that? I'll go to Josh first, and then I think I'll just, follow through with the rest of our panelists.
That's a really hard question, but I'll go first. And I guess what I'll speak to is kind of the passion of Youth Employment UK is that at the centre of any strategy that is about young people, it needs to include the voice of young people as it's being developed. So young people need to be involved in that process. They need to be understanding of what the skills are that they're going to be asked to be developing. They need to understand the routes that they can go on to develop those skills and what those skills are going to enable them to go on to in the future, and opportunities and employment, etc. So a skill strategy needs to focus around young person's voices to ensure that they are part of that picture and that strategy too.
Thank you, Josh. Over to you, Faiza. We are gleaning from your research with this question, so
yeah, I think that's a great input from Josh, and I think it rests so much, doesn't it, on policy affecting young people. I'm reminded of that old adage, nothing about us without us. I think that certainly rings true to all the findings we're hearing today, some of which have been really hard to listen to, actually. Just want to acknowledge that as a mum, as somebody who has worked with young people before and seen young people in really difficult circumstances, to still hear this coming through is really hard hearing. So what should a national strategy focus on? And I think it's a great question. And I say this tentatively because I think it's a really easy thing to say and a really hard thing to do. But of the things that we're asking for, if there was fair and accessible funding that was matched to local regions and provided opportunities for skills development and growth, and of course that can't happen alone. It has to happen, as I said, nothing about us without us, in a way in which agencies that are local can signpost people, can support people get the advice and guidance that they need. I'm reminded, and again from my days in the youth sector, how many young people do not have someone to talk to. And so actually, whilst funding's a really easy thing to say, it's the quality of services that it provides, it's the signposting to those advice and guidance counsellors, and it's the opportunities that could then be created in regions. And I go back to growth because we are a country that needs to invest in our skills and our talent. And it just seems such a missed opportunity that we're not able to then divert some of the funding and the rhetoric, I suppose, around growth, skills, levelling up, to actually what that really boils down for people and opportunities in local areas. And so I think absolutely take that direction from Josh on listening, and then designing services and funding around learners and the opportunities they can glean locally.
Thank you, Faiza. Over to you, Kat, and then we'll finish with Sharon.
Great, yeah, thank you. I think another area where we need additional support and resources around supporting the teachers. Obviously, we've seen from the strikes they're very they don't even have space to breathe, they feel like. So developing skills and competencies in their learners doesn't seem like, you know, the biggest priority at the moment. So part of that will be around resource and being able to have the availability and space to do more around this, but also there's something around training as well, helping teachers to reflect on how their lessons and the curriculum could integrate more the development of skills and competencies for all their learners, and help them make the link between what they're doing in the classroom and what skills these are developing, so that young people can articulate these more. And kind of just begin to have a shared understanding around the language of these skills as well. And things like Skills Builder are helping to do that, but that's needs to be much wider, I think, that coverage at the moment, to have that kind of larger scale understanding.
Thank you, Kat. And Sharon?
Yeah, I think the thing I would want to emphasize is helping young people develop the habits and skills of democratic decision making. So that means first doing that in schools. At the moment, students are in schools where their teachers don't have a say, in really much of a say in decision making, because so many schools are running in quite a top-down authoritarian way. So so actually learning about how you make decisions democratically, doing that in practice, so that when young people get to the workforce, they might find, and they will find in their workplaces, that they're not very democratically run. But if you have a whole cadre of young people coming into the workplace who understand how to do democratic decision making and understand the value of it and can push for it, that could help to really transform not only schools, but to make workplaces better, work better for workers and for everyone.
Thank you, Sharon. What a cracking showcase this has been, from Kat's research to Josh's research to Faiza's and to Sharon's. We've really gotten a depth to what young people are facing, the challenges they're facing, and that we know young people are speaking out more than ever, and it's time that they, you know, require that support. And I think the golden thread across all of the research is that we can all come together and collaborate. The employers, the educators, the government, everyone can come together to support the young people. So this has been a fantastic session. It's given me a lot of food for thought as well. As a young person working with young people, a lot for me to take back to my discussions with them. I don't think there's much for me to say to conclude, to be honest. I think the only thing or anything I'd say is that looking ahead to the future, we're hoping that we won't have to be having showcases like this, where we are facing research that has very high levels of challenging difficulties of our young people. Some of the statistics, as Faiza's mentioned, were a bit hard to read, but I am hopeful that in the future, we will be able to invest in our young people. Everyone will come together to ensure that our young people do not face these same challenges in the next 5 to 10 years from now. So that is all from me. I hope you've all enjoyed this showcase. I'd like to give a round of applause to all of our wonderful panel today. You have been fantastic. Thank you so much for delving deeper into your research. Thank you to Edge Foundation as well for organizing this event. This has been fantastic. And lastly, a thank you to everyone who listened, who tuned in, and who has taken an interest in the research. Thank you so much. I have been your chair, Ife Abassa. I've been very, very privileged to showcase and to chair this showcase. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your day and morning.